once again. Congratulations! You're over the halfway mark. You've hit week 5. This week we're only going to be covering one chapter because it's a really large chapter. There's a lot of information to digest in this chapter, so that's why we're only hitting one chapter. So it gives you a bit of a breather. So we're going to be talking about muscles. The things, especially skeletal muscles, that's the thing we're really going to deep dive into in this chapter 9. And because we just got done talking about bones and joints, and we want to talk about what makes them actually move. So let's go ahead and dive into the world of skeletal muscles. Woo! And of course we'll touch on cardiac and smooth a bit as well. So without further ado, Monty, shall we speak about muscles?
Sure.
Exactly. So.
I am mostly muscle.
Alright, so muscles could be considered organs within themselves, but the main purpose of a muscle is to convert chemical energy into mechanical energy. And remember, there's 3 main types of muscles in your body. Smooth, which is usually the linings of a lot of your organs, helps movement. It's involuntary, like when we swallow or we have a gag reflex, it's usually the smooth muscle doing that. Cardiac, which is your heart, again, it's involuntary. We don't have to think about our heart pumping unless it's doing something really out of whack, which is never good. And then last but not least, what we're going to be diving into this week is skeletal muscle. So remember if you remember when we talked about tissues and whatnot, we talked about how to differentiate between the 3. Remember, skeletal usually is not branched, has striations that are very definite. Multinucleated, in other words, the nuclei of the skeletal muscle is all over the place, and it's hard to tell the difference between one cell to the next. And we'll get into why that is in a minute. Monty's being squirrely today. Naughty boy. Almost changed the slide on me. And it's voluntary, so we can control that. Cardiac, remember, is branched. It does have striations, and you'll see single nuclei every so often. And smooth is non-striated. It's tapered. It's got a single nucleus, and it's non-voluntary, or involuntary, excuse me. We don't really have to think about our stomach, digesting, and he does have smooth muscle wrapped around him in actually 2 different directions, so he can get the movement on while he's digesting. Kind of like a washing machine. But anyway, except it's a digesting machine. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get into it. So, we are going to be talking about, it's kind of like ropes within ropes within ropes. And if you've ever been climbing, the strongest ropes are actually those ones that are actually ropes within ropes. And that's kind of what we're looking at, is on its base level right here is you've got a strand, and it's got a sarcomere and striations, and then a whole bunch of these strands coming off make up one area. So basically we've got right here the plasma membrane, and then a whole bunch of these. Again, we've got, basically a layer around that, keeping a whole bunch of these threads together. And again, the nuclei are on the outside, and then the capillary. And now this thing up here is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. We're going to talk about him. So if you remember your parts of the cell, so you have your endoplasmic reticulum, the smooth, and the rough. Well, muscle cells have a third called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And he's extremely important in delivering calcium, which acts as a trigger for these threads right here, which are made up of a whole bunch of actin myofilaments and myosin myofilaments, whereas the major thing that makes muscles contract. And we'll get into how they do that in just a second. But then there's a whole bunch of these inside of these things called fascillae. And then there's a whole bunch of fascillae inside of a muscle. So this is like literally threads inside of a string, inside of a whole bunch of strings that make up a thicker string that make up the whole muscle itself. And then the muscle is attached by a tendon to the bone. So that way, and we have a non-movable end and a mobile end, and there's a reason for that. And we'll get into that in a couple of lectures. We won't be going to that extreme this lecture. Remember, I'm splitting this into 3 so you can digest it a little easier, because this is a lot coming at you. And one of the biggest chapters is how muscles work. And Monty's definitely using his muscles today, because he's wiggling all over the place, you silly boy. He's like, I want to go to bed. Anyway. So, muscles, as I was saying, are a bit like ropes, especially climbing ropes. There's strands within bags. Now, the bags are called fascia, and they're connective tissue that holds the muscles together, and there's 3 flavors of that. You got your deep fascia, your subcutaneous fascia, and your subserous fascia. So, again, these are pointing out the fascias right here. So, the fascias, again, if you go back, oops, too far. If you go back here, again, this is like the deep fascia right here. And then we've got the, fascia again, the subcutaneous fascia, and then, of course, the subserous fascia. So these are all different types of fascias that are covering to keep all these guys in one container so they all work together. Because the last thing you need is your muscles doing everything independently of each other, especially when you're trying to do something like pick something up or whatnot. You don't need your arm to go. It's not cool. So we need them all to work together, and we need them all to stay together, and we do that by putting them in fascia, keeping them all together. And you're going to see this again next semester when we talk about the cardiac system. We talk about the heart, because we do talk about the heart quite a bit. And it, too, is literally a bag in a bag, because we don't need our heart leaving our chest anytime soon. So he's pretty much contained within bags, too. So you see this over and over again with muscles, is they're, again, given, held together by fascia. Anyway, so connective tissue that extends beyond the muscle forms tendons, and they often connect with the periosteum of a bone. If they make broad sheets like on our head, those are called aponeuroses. So when we smile at each other or we make weird faces at each other, we're, using our facial muscles, but they're connected to our head through aponeuroses because they're flat. So anyway, the epimysium is a specialized fascia that covers the whole muscle, and the paramecium covers single muscle fibers that are all together, and then the endomysium covers a single muscle cell or myocyte. So this right here is a myocyte right here. It is covered in an endomysium. And then this is a muscle fiber, which is made up of a whole bunch of muscle cells. Again, this is like the thread. This is the threads making up the rope. And this is the rope making up an even bigger bunch of ropes. So again, bags and bags, ropes and ropes. Because the more they work together, the stronger they are. And the less likely you're going to hurt yourself unless you're doing something really crazy with them. So be nice to your muscles. Anyway. Now, let's break it down even further. So if we're looking at a single muscle cell or a myocyte, basically what we're looking at is something like this. So here you go. Here's a single myocyte right here that I have on the screen, and I also have right here. And that basically is showing you what we need to look at. So on the outside, you'll see, and you'll see this too, we've got this sarcoplasmic reticulum. We've got these T-tubules all over the place that are acting as networks between these huge, thick microfibrils, which are made up of several types of things called actin and myosin strands. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. They're also known as thick and thin filaments, just, to be more confusing. But also we have tons of mitochondria, and you can see in here as well, all these little hot dog looking things right here. Those are not beanie weenies, my friend. Those are all the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are stuffed in between all of these myofibrils all over the place. And then they're all connected and surrounded by, it's tan on here but blue on this picture, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which delivers, and then we've got these T-tubules that keeps it all together. And then on the outside, you can actually see kind of where like the nuclei is, so stuff like that. So, yeah, so basically these muscle cells, these skeletal muscle cells, are big, really, really complicated on the inside. But that's so they can get enough energy to actually contract and relax. And we're going to get into how they contract and relax and how calcium is involved in this, because calcium is the trigger that pretty much tells these guys to contract and relax. And Monty's leaving again. He is using his muscles right now to definitely try and leave. Yes, yes, yes. I'll go get you a rat after this. Be nice. All right. He's a good boy. He's just squirrely today. All right. So if we look at one of those, so we're going to zoom in on a myofibril here. So we were looking at a myocyte, which is, a muscle cell, single skeletal muscle cell right here. And what we're looking at now is we're going to be zooming in on these myofibrils and what they're made up of. So if you zoom in on that, so basically, again, we have the myosin and the actin. The myosin are the thick filaments and the actin are the thin filaments. And a myofibril is made up of many, 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 many of these. They're held together by Z lines, which literally look like a Z if you looked at it under a microscope, which is thankfully what they're named after. Now there are H zones and M lines and A bands and I bands, but I'm not going to beat you to death with this part, because what I want you to understand is how these two, the myosin and the actin, work together. They are the very heart of all muscle cells and how these guys work. And these guys look really weird. So actin looks like a double thread of like beads, okay? And there's like these open sides on these actin. That's the actin itself. And then there's these ropes over the actin, and those are called tropomyosin. And they're blocking those holes, notice. And then the thing that's keeping it all together is the troponin, okay? So these holes right here on the actin are actually the binding site for these over here on the myosin. So the myosin has a myosin molecule, which is basically, it's got this woven tail. It's got a flexible hinge area, a binding site for ATP. Oh, it's here. And two actin binding sites, which look like this double head, which is curious looking, but hey, I wasn't there, it makes sense on there. So this is basically where the action is these two binding sites want to get and attach to these holes right here, where they basically hick and pull. And these guys are the pullers. So imagine it like a whole bunch of people in a field, and they're playing tug of war. The line itself, the rope that they're using, is the actin, okay? The pullers are these guys right here, the heads on the myosin. So again, tug of war, these are the people. See, there's multiple heads, so those are all the people ready to tug. And they're tugging on the actin, and that's how they contract. There's actually space between the Z lines that are connecting all the actin together, and the he's down my shirt, goofy boy. I'll let him go down there for a bit. It doesn't hurt anything, just tickles. And the myosin right here. So it pulls and pulls and pulls, and these pulls and pulls and pulls on the other side too, and your muscles contract. Now, if you're still confused, don't worry, because videos and moving images of this really help. Again, this is one of those places to where if you don't have, trust me, images help. It makes you go, oh. And I've got lots of those. Plus, I highly recommend, as always, to watch the crash course videos. So, what happens with this is there's something that basically these, so imagine, again, this is the rope, and these are the people pulling on the rope. And it pulls and pulls and pulls and pulls. However, you might have noticed, well, wait a second. What about those tropomyosins, that are those strings that are in the way of the actin? Yeah, we have to get rid of that because it's blocking the heads from attaching or getting ready to attach. And we have to actually get rid of or move the tropomyosin out of the way. And we do that using those sarcoplasmic reticulum by delivering a whole bunch of calcium ions. Calcium ions bind to the tropomyosin and move it out of the way so the actin is open for the myosin heads to attach and pull. And again, so here we go. Here's a nerve coming in too. This is a synaptic terminal of a motor neuron coming in. And you've just stepped on a Lego. And now you're going, get off the Lego. So what happens is they release acetylcholine, which then goes through the T-tubule and basically activates calcium. So there's a whole bunch of calcium in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and that gets dumped. So instantly these gates open, calcium dumps, it binds to the tropomyosin, pulling back so that way the actin is exposed, and this basically, the myosin is ready for it and attaches and pulls. And that's where we get this right here. So as you can see, this, and you're wondering, where did the ATP come in? Well, to get those heads literally cocked and ready to go is basically using ATP. So ATP is on the myosin side, not on the actin side. The actin side, calcium has to get it out of the way. On the myosin side, ATP has to get these guys ready to grab and pull. So if you come up here, again, calcium has come through, it's moved all of this out of the way, and now the heads can attach. The heads, which are attached, will go ahead and start pulling on the actin. ATP comes back, once it breaks that energy, the ADP down, it kind of loses energy and falls back. That's where ATP comes back in and gets him back into the cocked position to grab again. So again, hydrolysis, he grabs, he pulls. So ATP is basically getting this guy ready to go back and grab and pull again. That's his whole job in coming in, or else this guy can't reset without ATP. He can grab and pull once he's got an ATP attached, and then he splits it to get that energy to pull, but he needs to be replenished with another ATP. So again, this is why, again, if you're looking at the Z lines, here's the Z lines right here. Here's the myosin, the thick, here's the thin, the actin right there. And see, they're grabbing and pulling and pulling and pulling, and it makes the muscle contract. Again, the more videos and everything you watch on this, the more it kind of cements because you can see animations. And my snake is definitely leaving and has gone down my back. Really? Anyway, I guess he's just showing off his muscles to you. Because constrictors actually do have a lot of muscles, that's why they climb really well. Whereas venomous actually really is here in North America. They are horrible climbers. They're not as good as climbers. So if you see a snake up in a tree, it's probably non-venomous here in North America. Because a lot of our venomous around here are terrible climbers. They can't climb up at all. But Monty's a constrictor, and he's definitely showing off right now by leaving and going down my shirt. Anyway, so again, here's a wonderful cartoon I found that is absolutely wonderful. Again, ATP binds to myosin, making it detach from the actin. Then it turns into ADP, getting him cocked and ready to grab on. And then when the tropomyosin gets pulled out of the way by the calcium, he goes ahead and attaches and pushes or pulls, and I like to think he's pulling, but it's kind of like pushing. And then the calcium basically go ahead, the myosin then completes a power stroke, pushing on the actin. Calcium binds the troponin when it exposes it, and then he can grab. Or wait, I did that backwards. I went from here to here. So again, he can't get a grip. He's cocked and ready to go because he just split an ATP to grab on again. Again, the calcium comes, moves the troponin out of the way. Going to the right picture this time. Sorry about that. I think I could follow the arrows, but apparently I can't. And then again, he pushes, and again it goes back because he needs ATP to unlatch, and then split it to get ready again to do the whole thing over again, and then we get, contraction. And show off my flat muscle, flab muscle. Yeah, and that's it. So again, for your myosin to work, we need ATP. And if you're low on ATP, we use creatine phosphate that makes ATP more quickly. Which is why a lot of bodybuilders and whatnot, you see them going, oh yeah, I got to go get my creatine. And that's because, and I don't know if that's changed. If you're into bodybuilding, please let me know. Because I'm like, eh. Anyway, so you need oxygen to make ATP. That comes from the hemoglobin in your red blood cells, carrying it to your muscles. Your myoglobin, which gives the muscle its red-brown color, can also store some oxygen in the muscle itself if it needs it. Now, lack of oxygen brings on muscle fatigue, where the muscles loses its ability to contract. Also has a connection to the accumulation of lactic acid. All right, who here, raise your hand, even though I can't see you, has ever had your foot or your leg or your arm or your hand go to sleep? Guess what? That's if your body is trying to do things with muscles and staying alive. It's actually using creatine to form ATP because it's not getting enough oxygen. Because usually if you've got your, if you're doing something and it's making your leg fall asleep or your arm fall asleep or something, you've cut off the oxygen getting it to it. You kind of cut off the blood flow to minimal blood flow. And that's why usually you need to get up and shake yourself out and get the tingly-tinglies away. Well, the tingly-tinglies actually come from the buildup of lactic acid in your muscle. And that lactic acid is basically is the byproduct of just using creatine without oxygen to make ATP. And number two, it gives you that tingling sensation to let you know to get up and let blood flow move back to those muscles so that way you can get oxygen and nutrients back in there. So that's why literally your arms or legs falls asleep. That tingly sensation is the lactic acid buildup in your muscle. That's basically telling you, we need oxygen, help! And it's you going, and then you have to get your use of your muscle or your leg or your hand back because, you've knocked it out. It's not asleep, it's just running out of oxygen and you need to do something and that lactic acid is building up and it needs to be taken away from just using creatine. And that's that tingly sensation. So that's where you get, your legs asleep or your arms asleep. And you feel the tingly, that's the lactic acid. Pretty cool, crazy, huh? So anyway, we also generate a ton of heat, as most energy is lost through the body as heat. And this is true for everything, even machines. That's why machines get really hot. That's why, we need coolant in our cars, because this actually is a physics principle right here. We actually lose heat, all the energy in the form of heat. Anytime energy changes form, whether it be from chemical to using mechanical with your muscles, we generate heat because we're generating energy. And it's the same thing here if you've ever charged your phone and picked it up and gone, wow, my phone's kind of warm today. Or that part that actually transfers the AC into DC, that big honking square thing on your computer, that transformer, because that transforms the AC from your outlets to DC, because a lot of appliances work on DC a whole lot better than AC. So both Tesla and Edison was right. We need both Tesla, we need both AC and DC. AC is great for long distance energy transmission. DC is good for our appliances so they don't set themselves on fire. Because unlike my friend in college who built his own computer and didn't put a cooler in, and he messaged me on Messenger one day and said, hey, Lauren. And I said, hey, what? And he goes, I'm not kidding you. My computer's on fire as I type this. And I'm like, then fix it, you. I have so many stories about him. Anyway. College. Anyway. So like I said, so we lose a lot of heat too, which is why thermal cameras work on us really, really well. Anyway, and they can find us with the thermal imaging. Anyway, what is going on? I thought I turned off the noise. I guess I didn't. Anyway, my bad. All right, so again, mitochondria, that's why he's all over the place like I was showing you here. I mean, look at how many mitochondria are in the cell. There's like a whole bunch up the sides, down these sides, all in between. Wherever the muscle could fit, the muscle cell could fit a mitochondria, it shoved it in there. And we need that ATP to basically, again, unattach the myosin from the actin and then get it ready to go again to bind and pull it once more. So we can go, yeah, I got those gains, of which I have 0. Anyway, so again, not enough oxygen coming into the mitochondria, he can't make ATP. So remember, glucose plus oxygen equals ATP and carbon dioxide in water. But, that's just the short end of it. But, you know, again, if he can't get that oxygen, that's where you feel the burn, man. So, you know, when they say feel the burn, yeah, that means your muscles are going, keep up with ATP production. We're oxygen. So that's what's going on. That's the burn, yo. Now, the best way to get these muscles to keep working, of course, is to build them up. So, yeah, you need a bit of burn to help them get better at utilizing their oxygen usage. They actually make more mitochondria, and that's how you upgrade your muscles as you exercise. So yeah, you need to feel the burn, but don't feel the burn to the point you can't move the next day. I made that mistake a couple of times. Yeah. Just saying. Anyway, again, if you need more images on how actin and myosin work together and do the pulling and the relaxing, highly recommend watching, of course, Crash Course, because he has wonderful animations that I can't afford anybody to make for me. Oh well. We're not rich? What? Anyway, so moving on. So like I said, highly recommend. He helps break it down with animations that definitely help you visualize it. And that's awesome. So with that said, there you go. That's part 1 on muscles. I'll see you in part 2, where we talk about stretching and whatever not, and all that fun stuff. So I'll see you in part 2 in just a second. Bye.